Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I want to invite folks to find a seat, and I want to invite our panelists to please come on up to the front area. We have started our live stream, which is on YouTube, and we do have some folks joining us virtually, so we want to honor their time as well. I do appreciate so much everyone joining us today, and my name is Robert Alexander. I'm one of the pastors here at Davidson College Presbyterian Church, and one of my responsibilities is to be the staff liaison to our Social Justice Committee. This past year, one of our areas of emphasis related to issues of gun violence in our communities. And this is a program we were hoping to have last year, and we're having it now. So I'm so grateful for our participants on the panel today. And they are going to introduce themselves in just a moment after I pray. And I've invited them to simply tell us who they are and a little bit about their relationship to this issue, and maybe any initiatives that they've been a part of in recent memory. And then we will have a chance to ask questions and have some conversation in our group together here. We were hoping at one point to have a kind of a community watch event of a documentary that was shared. The name of that, and I don't know how many of you had a chance to watch Trigger. It was a really interesting documentary that was produced by Presbyterian Disaster Assistance and their trauma care unit, and talking about issues that they faced in going to communities around the country that have been impacted by gun violence. So hopefully you had time to think about your own questions and concerns, and maybe brought some of those with you today. But I'd like to offer a prayer for our time together, and then we'll proceed. Let us pray. Holy God, thank you so much for the gift of life, and we lament and ask forgiveness for ways that we have not honored life in others. And we lament the fact that life is so often cut short by gun violence in our communities. We pray, oh God, that you would give us the will and the courage and the faith to make our communities safer places where all can thrive. We thank you for our leaders that are working to make our homes and schools and communities safer places. We're grateful for those joining us today for this conversation, and pray that you would guide all of us to be more faithful and to honor the gift of life that you have given. We ask all this in your holy name. Amen. So now I'll just invite Chief Dunn, if you want to begin, and
Sure.
then we'll continue and let our other panelists introduce themselves and move on from there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Penny Dunn. I'm the Chief of Police here in Davidson, and been a law enforcement officer in Texas and North Carolina since 1986. So I have the misfortune of working many cases where gun violence has been a part of my responsibilities as a law enforcement officer. And I've lost friends to gun violence. During the prayer, I was thinking about a good friend of mine, Ken Copeland, who in December of 2017 was gunned down. He was an officer with the agency I had come from. And then, another officer that I was responsible for hiring was gunned down by an illegal firearm. He and 3 officers were shot, and he was killed on April 18th of 2020. And the dates kind of stick with you. And so I think we have watched the documentary, and I look forward to having this conversation in our community and hearing from you and also hearing from our other panelists. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Elise Dashew. I am at-large school board representative, so I represent you guys and all of Mecklenburg County. I serve as the chair of the Board of Education, and you know, I am troubled by there's just a lot of violence, a lot more violence in our community than in the past, and it is spilling over into our schools. And so, you know, we've really had to, over the years, really ever since Columbine, we've had to change how we build schools, how we, you know, train students and teachers what to do in case of a shooting. It's just crazy that we have to think about these things. But I'm also passionate about some potential solutions. Of course, there are no perfect solutions, and every single solution has its drawbacks, but we're just, as a community, going to have to cobble together lots of, you know, diverse solutions. But there are ways that we can make things safer, I firmly believe, and look forward to talking about that. Oh, and if I could acknowledge, we also have our Learning Community Superintendent, Aquanetta Edmonds, in the audience, and she oversees all of the schools up here, as well as Harding and West Meck, and has a lot, and Hopewell, of course, and Huff, and the feeder schools, and has a lot of, really too much, on-the-ground experience with weapons in schools. And so if there's an opportunity for her, she may be able to answer questions with a lot more content and real-world experience than I would.
One second. Sorry, I just want to.
Is my mic not on?
Live stream to hear well. You're going to have to speak everybody a little more into the microphone.
Okay.
You're not quite that tall.
It's for one of the basketball players.
Okay. Is it on? Okay. Feels a little intrusive, but I guess that's the way microphones are supposed to be. Hello, everyone. I'm Natasha Marcus. It is my honor to represent Davidson and parts of North Mecklenburg in the North Carolina Senate. I'm in my second term there. I live here in Davidson, so I'm in the beautiful bubble of Davidson where we often feel safe and very rarely have to think about gun violence, thank goodness. But it is always still on my mind. I was actually reminded as I sat down today to prepare for this, on my own Facebook feed. You get those memories from your Facebook feed and it tells you what you did 9 years ago, et cetera. Well, on my feed 4 years ago, I had posted a comment that said this: there were 2 school shootings in the past 2 days in our nation, both Kentucky and Texas. Does anyone even notice anymore? Has our president said anything about them? Are we ever going to come to a point where we can agree that now is the time to talk about gun safety laws? Or are we as a nation numb to this already? That was 4 years ago, and I am sad to say I don't feel like it's gotten any better. It's gotten worse. We're seeing it in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. I don't blame the schools, but it is definitely, feels anyway, like it is on the upswing. I serve in the Senate. I wish I had the kind of power to say, let's change this, let's address it now, let's put it on the docket to talk about it. At least let's debate some solutions. There are solutions. I'm happy to talk in more depth about the things that I have supported that I think we should change when the time is right for that discussion. We don't have to just say, oh, well, another shooting here and there. I watched the movie as well over the weekend, and one thing that jumped out at me is the importance of noting that it's not just mass shootings that we should be concerned about. Those are the ones that make the news, but it's the daily violence, that is actually where the largest toll to human life comes from. You know, one individual getting shot here and then tomorrow another over there, and it really adds up. And I would also mention that this isn't just about people who use their weapons to kill others. It's also about the very high rate of death by suicide. So for all the people who argue we need to have more freedom to use our guns and have guns and let everyone have guns and that'll somehow make our society safer, which I disagree with, to them I say, well, what about the 60% of gun deaths that are death by suicide? Can we talk about that? Because more guns definitely don't help that situation. So there's a lot to this. I wish I had the solution. I wish I had the power to fix it. I don't. But I'll continue to be one voice to lift this issue up and do my best because I think that's what people want me to do. That's what you sent me to Raleigh to do. So I will keep trying. But I will say we're very much on the defense when it comes to improving gun safety laws. And I'm happy to talk to you about what happened just in this last session when we're fighting in Raleigh on this issue. So I'll leave it at that for now and look forward to your questions.
Hello, my name's Brad Beer. I'm on the committee and I will be running around with this microphone. If anyone in the group would like to start with questions, we will also be taking questions on YouTube. So feel free to send those in, and we will somehow get those to the front of the room for answers. Anyone in here would like to start, please?
Hi, so I'm Joe Papovich, and I watched the movie too. And what struck me as an obvious issue is how many Americans support making it harder to get guns, you know, by registration and things of that nature. And yet nothing ever even comes of that. And so I have to say I am numbed. Every time I hear of a mass shooting, I just shrug and do something else because I've come to the conclusion that our political leaders, and I don't mean you, but
Thank you,
some
Joe. Thank you.
some of our political leaders just don't want to do anything about it. And so it just leaves me so frustrated and depressed. So it's not a question, it's a comment. But I guess the question is why can't legislators agree to do something about gun registration, given that polls show that huge majorities of Americans want to do something about it?
I'll take I agree with you, first of all. I, too, get frustrated on this issue and others, but we can't give up. So, Joe, please don't give up. Don't shrug. There is overwhelming support for universal background checks, which is, I think, what you mean. Why we have loopholes are shocking to me. One of the reasons, just to give you kind of on the ground, the reasons that we hear in Raleigh anyway, for getting rid of permits, pistol purchase permits, for example. That was the bill that tried to go through and did go through, was passed by the General Assembly. They're actually removing protections instead of adding them. Was vetoed by the governor, thank goodness, so it did not become law, but it almost would have. But the reason they give, right now they said, let's eliminate the pistol purchase permit process. In other words, you don't have to have a permit to buy a handgun. I was appalled, but the reasons that the other side argued are, one, people can get around that purchase permit anyway by doing individual sales. You know, you put it on the internet, you have a gun for sale, meet me in the parking lot. I'll take your money, you take my gun, no background check required. So yes, that happens. People get around those laws that way. They're not supposed to, but they do. And the second reason, right now under COVID, there's a huge backlog of these pistol purchase permit applications. And the sheriff was many, many months behind in doing the background checks that are required to get a pistol purchase permit, in large part because they're very thorough. That's a good thing. They are required, for example, to check mental health records for people seeking to buy a gun, in addition to whether they have a domestic violence felony charge that they're convicted of, et cetera. So it takes some time, and with COVID and personnel shortages, the wait was getting really long. So even though the Sheriff's Association even had agreed up until this year that, oh, we can't get rid of those pistol purchase permits, that's important, because without them, people will buy guns who shouldn't be able to buy guns. This year, they flipped and they pushed they got behind this bill to remove the pistol purchase permit requirement. So and those are their two reasons. One, people get around it anyway. Two, there's a huge backlog. Three, they would say there's this national, it's abbreviated to NICS. Chief Dunn, you know the full name, National, I don't know, NICS, whatever that stands for, but it's that automatic check that's a national database. And they say that's good enough, but that's not as thorough, it's not as updated, and it's not required for certain purchases. That's only for licensed gun sales. So the reasons for why they do this are not good ones, but those are the reasons, just so you know. And then secondly, they just don't want to be seen as doing anything that, quote, infringes on the Second Amendment, which again, I just disagree with their argument. I don't think this infringes on the Second Amendment. I think it would be popular. I think it's popular to have additional background checks for every weapon, even NRA members say. I think that was covered in the movie, if I'm correct. You know, even gun owners and NRA members believe that we should have universal background checks. So, like so many things, this movie pointed out that, you know, we're all traumatized by this violence. And so at some point, I gotta believe, I'm gonna keep hoping and believe that we'll all wanna have a solution to it, kind of like the pandemic we're in now. There's people who don't seem to wanna help us get through it, and we're all traumatized by this as well. So we can't give up. Their arguments don't make sense, but so far they're winning, at least in North Carolina, but we need to keep pushing.
In the meantime, and I hope my mic is working. In the meantime, there are more guns in homes and in cars and on the streets than ever before. And more first-time gun owners than ever before. And so there's not enough knowledge of safe storage of weapons. And that is something that we can tackle and that we need to tackle. So we need to normalize talking about safe storage the way we normalized in the 70s talking about drunk driving. And because before Mothers Against Drunk Driving, you would never think of having a designated driver or taking the keys away from someone who's drunk, but that became normalized. Car seats became normalized. If your little one is going to the park for a play date, you ask, okay, make sure they're in a car seat. And so there are tools that we can use to raise awareness about that and increase people's comfort level in talking about that. And there are so many people who, when you talk about gun safety, who have guns, they go, oh, I didn't think about that. You're right. Storing the gun in the sock drawer is not safe storage. And so I will bet that a lot of municipal police departments give away gun locks and try to educate the community. I would like to see CMS and our municipalities in Mecklenburg County with the county health system and the big hospitals kind of join forces in doing an awareness campaign on this. I think we could actually make a bit of a difference with that.
I can just add that any opportunity I have to speak with a group, whether it's about abuse of anyone, child abuse and safety. Last month, I think it was, in December, I met with a group of immigrant parents at Ada Jenkins, and this very topic came up. And just creating that awareness that, yes, please come see us for a free gun lock and how to keep it safe. And then in conversations about mental health, and that if you have a gun in your home, if you don't feel like you can you still need to keep that gun, well, come get a gun lock. Take the key with you if you feel that there's someone in your home that may use that against themselves. All the different types of conversations that we have, all the situations, there is an opportunity to talk about gun violence in so many ways. It's not just about the mass shootings. We all know our biggest fear is someone walking into a school. But we have people who are walking into churches, places of worship, into stores, into movie theaters, everywhere, that the conversation can be had is that gun violence is out of hand. And I think one thing that Senator Marcus did not mention is that one of these excuses is that if we just have enforcement of the laws on the books. Well, I'm here to tell you that enforcement seems to be the answer for every problem. People want to reach for the police for mental illness. People want to reach for the police to take care of the problems of everything in society, and we can't do that. Number one, that's not what we do. That's not what we were meant to do. The laws on the books can be enforced, but often there are paths that there are barriers thrown up in enforcing those laws. So we're not always successful.
And there are major loopholes where it's legal to buy a long gun, for example, at a gun show.
Right.
Long gun meaning those AR-15s and those awful, awful weapons that are meant for war. You can buy those legally without a background, without a permit or a background check at a gun show. That's totally legal. Nothing Chief Dunn could do about it.
Exactly.
And even talking about, legal guns that are just your more typical handguns that lots and lots of families have. I've got a statistic here that there are 4.6 million American children who live in homes with guns that are both loaded and unlocked. And 1/3 of youth suicides and unintentional deaths can be prevented by securing guns. So like both said, it's not just about the big, horrifying mass shootings. It's those everyday tragedies that absolutely can be prevented.
We had an incident in Cornelius recently where a child shot his mother. And a sibling too, if I recall. But yeah, that's incredibly sad. Heather has somebody.
Yeah, so continuing in this vein of conversation, we have a question from Julie Pepper on our YouTube channel. So, she asked, she'd love to hear from the three of you more about some of the solutions we can actually consider or enact.
Shall I go first?
Sure.
So I'm a state legislator, so the solutions that I can help work on, there are many solutions, but the ones that I can help work on would be state-level policy. So one of the big ones that I've always supported, there's a few different words for it. I call it a red flag law. This is the idea, and judges are begging for us to pass this, by the way, because what it would do is allow family members to come to a court and say, we're worried about Uncle Joe. He's talking about killing himself, and he's got a lot of weapons at his house. And he's seeing a psychiatrist, but we don't know if the medication's working, et cetera, and we're really worried we're going to lose him. And the judge could, in that case, through a hearing, giving due process to the question before the court, make a decision that that person, Uncle Joe in this case, should temporarily have his weapons removed from his possession for his own safety. That, to me, is a wise step that we could take that would absolutely save lives, and it has saved lives in states that have passed it. It would be something that would stop, say you have you're a parent, you have a child who you know has been bullied at school, is really, really angry, has weapons at his disposal, and has made mention of maybe admiring other school shooters, that might be a situation. In that case, if that child is of age to own weapons, you can't take them away from him without a judge's order to do that. A red flag law would come into a situation like that. Now, the people who are against these red flag laws, they'd say, oh, that's an infringement. You're going to take people's weapons away without any due process. And I say, you don't know what a red flag law is then if you think that's without any due process. We have courts involved in that situation because we know that we have a Second Amendment right to own weapons, and you can't just go in and take it on a suspicion that someone might become violent. But when there's evidence that holds up in a court of law, and the removal of the weapons is temporary, sometimes 10 days, for example, just long enough to get some help, check that person out, make sure they don't kill themselves or hurt anyone else. That would absolutely save lives. Now, have we tried to pass a law like that in North Carolina? Oh, yes, we have, many times. And guess what? It gets no hearing, not even a hearing. I think it would be popular if we could get the message out that this is not a lack of due process, take everybody's weapons away with no evidence, etc. It is simply a smart step to deal with impending trauma. We filed them, they get ignored. We can't even bring it up for, we'll never get a vote on it under current leadership in Raleigh. So that's one thing. I have some other ideas, but I don't want to dominate, so I'll let Elise talk because I know she has ideas too.
Well, and I can talk about what's actually happening right now in our schools as far as solutions. As we speak, we are rolling out the Say Something app for our students, which is an anonymous reporting system where a student can report really anything from bullying to I saw a student with a gun, or I heard a student might bring a gun to school, to sexual harassment. It's a whole wide range, and it's anonymous. They can either make a phone call or do this through an app, and the calls are fielded by it's a Sandy Hook Promise is a national organization that was formed after the Sandy Hook disaster tragedy, and then relayed back to liaisons in each school who are trained to then follow up really quickly. So that right there is going to make a big difference. We have ordered a whole lot of clear backpacks for our high school students. That's taken, people have been very critical of that, but it's something that many of our principals have asked for. A lot of the guns that have come to campus have been in backpacks. And if you can, yes, there are other ways to bring a gun to school, but if it's in, if it's in a backpack, that is one way to mitigate. It's one mitigation measure. And students will not have to buy their own. We would be providing the backpacks. We are looking into body scanners at several of our high schools. They're very, very, very expensive, so we can't roll them out at every door of every high school right away. So we're prioritizing which ones first, but that is in the works. So these are similar to what you see at Panther Stadium, and they're a little bit more expeditious than like what you have to go through at TSA at the airport. Because if you could imagine, some of our schools are over 3,000 students. You can imagine starting school in the morning with 3,000 students having
You'd
to
miss
line up
all
to
of
get
first
through
and
one
second
door.
period while the students were trying to be,
And then from the prevention standpoint, for years we've been trying to rebuild our numbers of social workers and school psychologists and guidance counselors. Those numbers were really decimated in the last recession, and we're still rebuilding. But it's something we've been advocating for funding for additional positions for many, many years with the state legislature and with the county. And that has, and some of that has happened. And so that's, social, emotional issues at the root of that. If you can take care of that, obviously that's a more holistic response. Our students have some really good ideas, and Brianna Fowler, who is the student advisor to my board last year, has been a big champion of peer mediation, and so she's gotten that going on a pretty large scale, actually. She's a remarkable young lady. I'm forgetting thing. What am I forgetting on? Say that again? Say that again?
Security screening?
Oh, yes. So, that's right. And so, following the shooting at Butler, which was, what was that, 2017?
I think it was after that, yeah, I think it
Yeah,
might have been
2019?
I think it was 2019.
2019.
yeah.
We started a system of random screenings. So you have a team that shows up at a school, kind of randomly chosen, and will go into a classroom and has a very special way of checking everyone's bags without getting in the kid's space. Yeah, we're one of the only districts in the nation with our own police force and with a dog that is trained to sniff out guns. So those, we've tripled the number of those happening? Yeah. So those are a few examples, and then there's some others that are gonna require budget requests in the coming year, or budget reallocations, cutting things so that we could pay for more communities, security associates or campus security associates, these sorts of things. So that's all in the works.
Okay, I just talked about enforcement is not the answer to everything. So people call us, will want enforcement on everything until something like this happens. And then we find out, oh yeah, I heard last week he was going to do something, or he posted on social media, or she said, and yet they don't share that. And some of that is a lack of understanding of how we work in law enforcement. We're not out there to, if something is reported to us, we're going to keep that confidential until at such point it becomes a public record when a criminal offense or a charging is made. And most of the time, I would say that when we start investigating these, it's not to that level, but it's an outcry. Someone needs help. Perhaps they need to be taken into custody and presented for a magistrate to make that determination on which level we're going to be going, and which direction we're going to be going in. If it involves a juvenile, then obviously it's highly sensitive and that none of that information is going to be released. But I think we have to, it's just like, when we're talking about, mental health, is that we have to just, there's no shame. If there is something going on in your family that you think could be dangerous to your family or to someone else, then you've got to speak up. The app that you're talking about, you've got to speak up. Not only for your own well-being, but for the well-being of others. You can't bury our head in the sand and just ignore these things. Oh, they're just being a kid, or they're just having a bad day. I read something on the news, I think it was last night or the night before, about a woman at a school board meeting about masks, and she says, I'm going to load up all my guns and come down to the school. Well, oh, she didn't really mean it. Well, really? That's not how we look at things anymore. It's not a joke. You don't say bomb when you're in the line at the airport. Please tell us. That's the time when you really need to contact the police and tell them things are going on. Yet, most of the time what we find out, unfortunately, is after the investigation after an event is that there were warning signs and no one took any action because they were ashamed or they didn't want to step out there and what if they were wrong? Well, you were right. And what if you're right and you stop it? That's a much better feeling than not saying anything at all and finding out that you were right but someone else paid the cost.
Any questions? Yes.
I remember Chief Dunn spoke about police department is not really prepared to deal with family, domestic disturbance. And as you just explained, before that really terrible incident take place, is police department prepared to deal with their domestic problem, or you're not allowed legally to do it? And when that happens, what would you like to do to improve your department to deal with domestic abuse, or that type of thing? I would like to hear from you.
Well, I'll just say that if you know anything about what I've done across my career over 3 decades, is that my passion and my objective is to help victims of violence. That has primarily been victims of violence, of domestic and dating violence and abuse and child abuse. The thing that we have to do to prepare as a police department is to continually train and expose our officers to new techniques and training so that they can do the best possible job, and when they arrive on a scene, recognizing the signs, because there are often times that a victim will, upon the arrival of an officer, will minimization, of what has happened to them. And to recognize those signs and to take action and start building their case for an evidence-based prosecution of that person, that batterer. So when we talk about gun violence and we talk about domestic violence, is that I tell the officers, and I didn't come up with this was some training that I had years ago, is that each and every time that you are responding to a call out there, and it may be your second or third or fourth, I don't know how many times sometimes you go out, but each and every time, don't ever give up, because that may be the one time that that person will leave. But you also have to understand that each and every time that you go out, and there has not been someone killed, you're practicing homicide prevention at that point. If you can stop that batterer at that point, then we're successful. But if we don't take action and they continue to do what they do, they become empowered and they will get worse. And so think of it in those terms, is that you are trying, your attempts are to prevent a homicide in the future. So as our department, how do you support us, is that we have tremendous support in this community for our police department. And we need to continue to grow as we have been doing. And very thankfully, we've been allowed to increase the budget as allowed by the whole town budget, taking that into consideration, so that we can invest in training of our officers, not just locally, but across the state, and also going out of state to learn new techniques and ideas, and to work better with our regional partners, and being prepared for any type of event, whether it be domestic violence or gun violence.
Good afternoon. Thank y'all for being here. My background is in nursing and in public health. And, I think as in this documentary you watched, they talked about this as a public health problem. And for years, the CDC has not been allowed to study it, but I think that has recently changed, which I'm grateful for. But I think these kinds of public health issues often take a multi-pronged approach, so I'm interested in how we can break out of our silos. I know at a local level sometimes that's easier. I'm curious about that. I know at the beginning of the career when we were dealing with AIDS, there was a lot of information about safer sex, and it became normalized to empower people to talk about that and how to protect themselves. I would like to see parents empowered, talking to their kids about when you're going to someone else's house. Do we know, are the parents going to be there? Do they own guns? Are they locked up? I know in my practice as a nurse practitioner, we always asked at a primary care visit, do you own guns? Do you lock them up? Do you store the ammunition separately? So I think all these kinds of things, they need to be also taught. When I was in high school, we also had gun safety. I don't know if that's still required in our schools. That wasn't something that was taught, just like safe sex used to be taught in school, and that has been decimated. So I think we need to go back and look at how can we empower people with information and normalize that just like I can ask for people to behave safely around me and I can establish certain boundaries. Yes, people who have guns have rights, but so do people who don't have guns. People who smoke have rights and people who don't smoke have rights. We all need to think about it as a community, and I would like to know how y'all, or what you see as ways that different segments can collaborate, since it's a broad issue.
Over the winter break, I've had that exact conversation with elected officials from, Mecklenburg County commissioners, with each of the mayors, although Mayor Knox was tied up when I was making these phone calls. And so I've got to circle back with him. And with Atrium. And there's really good work happening in these silos. Mecklenburg County has a powerful program for violence prevention. Atrium, for years, has had a program that's run by their Dr. Jacobs, who oversees the trauma department. He's a trauma surgeon. When people come in with gunshot wounds, work with the families to to educate on gun safety, to find out what led to this, how can that be prevented in the future, if there's a beef going on between different people, how to stop that revenge cycle. They're doing really powerful work that I would love for us to shine more of a light on, and so that is exactly when we talk about achievable solutions, like I'd like to see within the next few months our groups joining forces with our collective visibility, our collective number of voices that we can influence in an education campaign on gun safety. Every municipal police department is working on this, and sometimes feeling like they're working on it in the shadows and could use more visibility. The sheriff does great, incredible work on gun safety, Sheriff McFadden. So there is good stuff going on that we just need to amplify.
I will chime in and say I really appreciate your question, because we can't legislate the solutions. Even if I could get a majority of people in Raleigh to agree with us, you still can't fix it all from, by changing laws. You have to, and I think a lot of it is knowledge. I forget the number, but I know that having a gun in your home increases the chances of someone in your home getting shot, and it doesn't make you any safer. So, I wish I had that in front of me right now, but that's the kind of statistic that I try to tell people. I knew someone who was a new father, and he said, I've never thought I needed a gun before, but now that I have a child, I'm thinking about getting a gun to protect us. And I said, please don't. Please don't. It's much more likely that there's going to be an accident that injures someone in your home than that you will ever use that gun to protect you or your children. So things like that, I think the knowledge campaign is important. I would mention a group called Moms Demand Action. They're a nonpartisan, active group here. There's a chapter here. Please join if you're interested. I've been a member for years, and one of the things they really push is the Be Smart campaign, which is about safe storage, like Elise was mentioning how important that is. Educate parents, if you are a gun owner, please think these steps every time. And then, of course, healthcare providers, I think, are so important, both for mental health access, domestic violence situations, all of that. I do think, just piggyback on a little bit what Chief Dunn said, that we are better as a society at addressing domestic violence. It used to be something that officers would look the other way. Oh, this is a personal matter at their household. We are getting better about that, and that's good. But it still happens too often that the victim feels like she can't speak up and doesn't speak up, and then it's too late. So all of these things working together, I agree with you. The last little thing I'll say is you mentioned about the lack of data and statistics and research on this. That has been a major point of frustration for me. When they were trying to push through this bill that I told you about earlier about getting rid of the pistol purchase permit, I asked what I thought was a simple question, and I said, well, how many applications passed this NICS, the instant national, whatever it's called, the NICS background check, but didn't pass the more specific background check that the sheriffs run? Because to me, that proves my case that it's not unnecessary, it's not duplicative, it's an important next step. I really had trouble getting that number. And the only way I got it was that the lobbyist who works for the group that gets paid every time they have to run that background check, so they have a monetary interest in keeping this, they gave me the number. I shared that number on the floor of the Senate when I made my argument that it was, the number they gave me was 2,379 permit applications were denied that would have passed NICS in Mecklenburg County in fiscal year 2020 to 2021. That to me is a huge number. And no one had heard that number before. Nobody else could confirm it because there aren't public statistics on this, which is crazy. And then I got threats and major pushback and an ethics complaint filed against me by this group called the Grassroots North Carolina, which is basically North Carolina's version of the NRA. They were so mad that I had said that. They didn't have any statistics of their own to show me because those statistics are not available to the public, but they claimed that what I said was a lie. And I said, I repeated what I was told by the people who would know. So prove me wrong if you want to. But that's just one example of how the lack of basic information that should be available to the public. We should be able to call the sheriff and say, how many permits did you deny that would have passed the NICS system? We don't know. And part of that is because the lobbyists have so much power that they keep that information secret from you. And I think that's wrong.
I just want to say thank you for the work that you did and still, I guess, continue to do with in the medical profession. We can think back. I certainly, you reminded me of something. The years ago, going into a pediatrician's office with one of my children, and so they come in and do the usual intake, and then they close the door, and on the back of the door was, if you are being abused, if you're being battered, if you need help, we can help you. It was a local domestic violence shelter flyer, and at the bottom they had put the phone number, and you know how you clip it so people can tear off a number. I don't know how many times I've been in the offices where every single one has been torn off. What an extremely sad statement, right? And I know it's not because they weren't replacing them, because that doctor, I knew them personally, and I knew that they were so concerned. They may not speak up. A victim might not speak up, but that was the grassroots, thing coming through the medical profession at that time to reach out and offer help. And I was, as a police officer, extremely grateful, because that was one other person we may get to come in the door that will finally take that step. The one thing I do want to, is that I was struck, I couldn't remember, the Office of Violence Prevention under the Mecklenburg County Health Department. Lots of good information under there, and their partnerships with other local governments, but also with Novant, Atrium, the schools, everything else. So I just pulled that up while we were talking.
Yeah, they're doing really good work.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, again, thank you so much for that question. The part I wanted to add about our schools, in addition to the work that we're already doing, is we talk about threat assessments. And so every single time in which a child may make a threat or make a comment that's perceived as a threat, every single school administrator has been thoroughly trained in order to conduct what we call a threat assessment. They happen pretty regularly, unfortunately, and take a lot of time, unfortunately, but then there's a lot of great things that come out, I'll be honest. And one of the questions that we have to ask is, are there weapons in the house? So when the parents do receive that phone call, we're just trying to get ahead of, are there weapons in the house and are they secured? And sometimes it plays out with something very simple, such as, I am going to kill you. Sort of the mention that you stated in regards to the board, the lady at the school board meeting that talked about bringing her guns. I watched that and thought about, now here we are. What does that do to the school? And that's the part where people don't really realize all of the plays that have to take place in order to ensure that our schools are safe and secured. And so quite often, I just wanted to add that other piece, as Board Chair Dashu mentioned, is that we do threat assessments. We ask about what's in the home, and when we have that point of honesty, we do ask, are those weapons secured, ensuring that students can't get a hold of them. And then there have been instances in where we would call for a security check, meaning we'll say, hey, can police officers please go to the home in order to ensure that there is a point of protection in regards to this incident, and just trying to get ahead of it. And so I wanted to make sure that we threw that very important part out there as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from our YouTube attendee, Rob Winokur. And Rob makes a great observation that says that a 60-year-old who has a gun from 1960 can shoot, that gun can shoot just as well as a gun purchased at Walmart yesterday. Are there any things being done locally or elsewhere in North Carolina to get guns out of the public circulation?
The police department does have a gun buyback program. I don't, Aquanetta, do you remember? They recently actually raised the price that they will pay you if you turn in a gun. So it's, yeah, $250 for turning in a gun. But as far as taking them out of circulation, I don't see that happening in America. But again, whether it's a gun from 1960 or a gun from 2021 or 2022, take out the ammunition, store the ammunition separately from the gun, and lock it all up in a safe, not in the sock drawer, not under the bed.
And use a gun lock. There's several that block the trigger, or actually a cable is fed through the gun so it won't function at all.
And I did want to add, quite often you've heard about guns in our schools. A lot of times I've asked the students, hey, what happened? Where did you get it? And truly they will say they found them in the neighborhood. There are stashes in the neighborhood where sometimes there's an adult that may be careless, or maybe they're running from something. They stash them in the neighborhood underneath grates in the woods, and the kids know it. And so truthfully, that scares me, because that just really speaks volumes about how accessible these weapons truly are. And this is where it's coming straight from, not what I heard or what I tried to figure out. I'm asking kids right in the moment, hey, what were you thinking? Where did you get the weapon? Why did you bring the weapon? And a lot of times they found them in the neighborhood, and they're hanging out with their friends, and they're all touching it and passing it around. And can you imagine the fear of what could possibly happen? But then there's that one kid that says, well, I'm going to take it to school. And then it turns on to a whole nother level of actions that we have to make sure that we're taking and trying to put in place and trying to provide levels of security. So when you think about it, and when they talk about they're stashed in the woods, they know where they are. We don't, but they do. And so that's really scary to me, truthfully speaking, just knowing that that's accessible to any child that knows where they are, and they can really go to that wood, go to the woods, go to that grate, as they say. Sometimes you can lift up the grate, and you can find that there are guns or weapons that are stored underneath there when people are maybe on the run. So I wanted to add that part.
And how sad that there are so many children that feel unsafe enough that they want a weapon, not only to bring to school, but just to have one at all. Children shouldn't have to think those things.
There are other communities where there are, I think, pilot programs for, because there are some students who say, when they bring a weapon to school, and not just a gun, it could be a knife or, pepper spray, it's because of the walk home from the bus stop to home or the bus stop to work. They feel like they need protection. And so I have heard of an initiative in another city where volunteers will escort a child during for that unsafe portion of their walk.
Walk buddies.
Walk buddies.
Yes. I just want to add to that is that none of us have talked about taking guns away. What we're asking is for responsible gun ownership of the weapons that are already in many homes. Don't make them accessible to children. Secure them. Lock them up. Don't leave them in your car. Can't tell you how many reports we take in Davidson of guns left in a vehicle, left unlocked, and items are stolen, including a gun. In 2015, there was a homicide in Davidson. The man was shot with a gun that was stolen from a car in South Carolina. It took about 6 years to track down. So, it's just take those measures, take those steps to make sure the guns do not fall into the wrong hands. And I'm talking about those guns that have been responsibly acquired, and now we need to make sure that we keep them safe from others.
And as far as that goes with the message of responsible gun ownership, the conversations that I've been having across the county with my elected counterparts, with some real conservative folks and some folks of the much more liberal persuasion, there has been universal support for that sort of an initiative and raising awareness of the importance of responsible gun ownership and gun safety, the importance of it, and how to do it.
I will echo that, but I would also, I'm not afraid to say I don't think AR-15s and other military-style weapons should be sold, period. I just disagree that they're necessary or covered by the Second Amendment for that matter. So everything you said, yes, but I don't think that all weapons for everybody is the right way to go. I'll just leave it at that.
Hello, Gordon Clark here, DCPC member, and thank you all for coming. This is really helpful. But one of the things I wanted to listen more about that's happening, you've heard about in other communities, are these different intervention programs that they're funding with resources that are outside of asking our school teachers and administrators to take on all these additional roles, or our police to take on all these additional roles of dealing with violence that comes up in the community, or mental health issues, where they're dedicating resources to kind of a new way of approaching this problem. And I didn't know if that was something that was being talked about here in our community.
Mecklenburg County and the city of Charlotte have a violence, I think they call it the Violence Interruption Program, which is aimed to do exactly that. And there are some folks in the community who partner with our schools who know the kids and the kids' families, and they know when tension is sparking up. And, there was a fight over the weekend, and it could spill over to someone's little brother at high school the next week, and they'll call a principal and give them a heads up. So those sort of trusted relationships are really important.
I know, the volunteer groups that I'm talking about, just concerned parents who come together and regularly help educate people, push for better legislation and those things. They're not funded by any government. They're, they're just working for what they think is right. And those groups exist all over the nation. More and more people joining.
Seem to be successful. They're the ones that are setting it up, kind of like an arm of law enforcement. But instead of a police officer coming to the event, whatever that might be, it's somebody who isn't as threatening, that doesn't have, uniform and weapons and all that. And it's kind of another way to tackle this problem. I'm not hearing that.
Gordon, do you mean when someone's having a mental health crisis, for example, and yeah, and your mother calls about her, right? Yes, I think more and more well, I should let Chief Dunn, understanding that showing up with a weapon, a police officer showing up with a weapon is maybe not the best reaction in all situations. I'll let Chief Dunn talk to that.
What we are looking at is an expansion of a program currently done in the county with the mobile crisis unit. And we do a lot of North Mech with our partners in Cornelius and Huntersville to try to tackle problems. And mental health is one that I've been having conversations with Chief Kevin Black and Chief Vince Hoyle of those two departments about our response with clinicians rather than law enforcement. Also, that is a liaison for anyone who needs to reach out and has questions. They're not quite sure where it belongs. And we already get some of those, but we really need someone that can assist someone, a resident, and really getting the right assistance. And I would say that most of the time that it is related to mental health. I'm just going to be realistic here, is that I don't deal in Davidson with a lot of gun violence, and I've come from a community before where we did. And so I see that as a real blessing, but that doesn't mean that we won't experience here, and we have to be prepared for it. So I love the programs that CMS provides, because our children are in those schools, our community children are in those schools, and they're being exposed to it. And have a better understanding. So I think it's just that we continue looking at building those partnerships that we have, so that we have that exposure, but that we also look at new ways of providing people assistance that is not in a uniform and wearing a badge and a gun. Because we're not at that level. That's what people are seeking. They're seeking assistance.
There's a group called Mental Health America, the local chapter is of Central Carolinas, that they do excellent training for, it's almost like CPR, but for mental health. So they call it QPR, which stands for Question, Persuade, and Refer. And it's pretty in-depth and yet accessible training for how to really truly help someone who is at risk for suicide. And so they train a lot of police departments and fire department, EMTs, and general public. So that they have a lot of good resources too.
I'll add two things that came to mind as I was listening to my friends here speak. One is in Davidson, for example, we have Davidson Lifeline, and you can take a class on mental health first aid. So that's for everybody to know how to intervene, not just at a school level, but when you see someone who's maybe contemplating suicide, what do you do? Or someone having a mental health crisis, what do you do? I think that's important. That's a non-governmental answer to this problem. And second, I would say I cannot let this opportunity go by without emphasizing how there are so many people in our state who do not have access to health insurance, and therefore do not have not only not regular checkups about their physical health, but their mental health. There's nowhere for them to go when they are feeling a crisis. And it's one of the many reasons why I fight for Medicaid expansion. We should have everyone in our state covered so that they can see a psychiatrist if that's what they need, and not have to self-medicate, sometimes with illegal drugs, or make it worse, or end up doing something that they regret. So access to health insurance, because when the mobile health unit shows up and they want to refer this person to somewhere to get help, if there's no insurance, that creates a whole second crisis of how do you pay for that? Who's covering that? How do you get help if that's what you need, if you can't afford it and you don't have health insurance? I saw Marcia in the back with her hand waving around. I can tell she wants to add something.
Can I?
Oh, okay, sorry. When I was talking, I saw her doing this, so
Hey, but before we move on, can I just add one thing to that? And that is the importance in our schools to support CMS and their endeavor to add to the counselors in the schools. Because I have over my career, I have seen the evolution of bringing in police officers onto the campuses. Initially thought to be a security, added security. I will tell you that every SRO, that we're very careful about selecting them, is that they become a mentor and counselor more, a trusted adult. And they are trained in mental. You talked about mental health first aid. We send our whole department through that because it's not just about recognizing it in others. It's also in recognizing it in your coworkers. Because suicide among police officers has risen dramatically in the last 5 years. Okay, but it is that we really need for there to be a resource in our schools for these kids to go and talk to. And most of these kids, it's not like they have, a psychosis immediately. It's just that they've hit a rough time, and they need some assistance, and they don't know where to go. And I think that's the first place that that they're going to look for. And whether it's in a school resource officer or a counselor, I'd rather it be a counselor who's obviously that's their vocation. That's what they do. So.
Thank you for your support.
Very much needed, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
Mr. Chuck, I promise you're next. I wanted to add sources of strength. So we've been doing
Oh,
sources
yes.
of strength at Huff, as many of you know. We've also been doing it at Davidson is another extension of that. And we've also been working at Providence. So of course, to your question, I'd love to see how can we expand. Of course, there's money involved, but the children really seem to respond well in the cases where we have it. So in speaking to that, there have been many times and instances in which the kids have intervened truthfully in a suicide attempt, or they've made awareness because they've had a level of training. So have the staff had the level of training that's allowed us to intervene. And I'm not able to answer why we haven't expanded upon that, but I think that's one really good gem that we know, and we have instances where it's working. What's preventing us from expanding upon those opportunities? Thank you for lifting that.
Hi, my name is Chuck Caputo, and my question is for Senator Marcus. Given that proliferation of guns is a major problem in this area that we're talking about, does the state of North Carolina have on its books right now law or proposed legislation that would restrict the number of gun purchases an individual can make in a given period of time?
No. And we won't, given current leadership. No, you can buy what you want. As long as you pass the background check, you can buy what you want. And even if you don't pass the background check, you can go to a gun show and buy them there.
Hi, I'm Marcia Webster, and I want to thank Natasha for mentioning Davidson Lifeline. I've had the privilege of being on the Davidson Lifeline Board of Directors since its inception. And I participated in mental health first aid, and I actually used it about 3 weeks after I was trained. A young woman who worked for me at Davidson Housing Coalition had left and moved on to another position in Charlotte, and she called me out of the blue one day, and she said, "Is there any way you and I could meet for dinner?" And I said, "Sure." So we had dinner at 131 Main, and then she just burst into tears, and she was thinking suicide was her best answer. but she also was not making enough money and didn't have insurance that would cover psychiatric treatment. And so, while I didn't have the best answers, I could go back into my training with mental health first aid and talked her off the ledge and kept working with her through the night and the next day. And I got her lined up with someone who would provide psychological assistance at a very, very reduced rate. And that was the best example of how quickly you can respond and help someone who's at great risk of losing their life. And so, Natasha, thank you, but Mental Health First Aid is available in this area. Again, it's through Davidson Lifeline, a nonprofit organization here in town, and has been used by many, many, many people.
I recommend it. I've taken the training. I probably need a refresher course, and I recommend it. And I will, just to bring the conversation back to guns, which is what we're talking about today, it should be noted that that's not the only way to end your own life, but if you choose to try with a gun, it's much more likely that you will die as opposed to other ways of doing it. So it's just one more reason why statistics are so high. In North Carolina, it's 59% of gun deaths are suicides.
Any other questions from our audience?
Thank you for being here. John Hurst from DCPC, and I think I have a couple questions. In the area of, it seems like there's an importance to elevate this conversation and keep it elevated and not just after tragedies that happen in the news. And I was wondering, it could be a question for Robert, or it could be a question for our Social Justice Committee. Are there conversations or planned conversations that have with other communities of faith to keep this conversation active and elevated? And the other part related to that, I guess maybe is for Chief Dunn, what kind of interagency activities, programs happen between like Davidson and other communities, either in our immediate area or even nationally, that collaborate with best practices or things that don't work to keep solutions as possibilities?
Well, Robert, I'm going to go ahead and take that first part of our question. Robert is busy back there helping with our AV. That's a great question, John. And, you know, one of the things the DCPC Social Justice Committee is looking forward to is building community partnerships across all of the different communities of faith here in Davidson and North Mecklenburg as well. We consider this forum to be a first step in that regard. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the other initiatives that we look forward to in 2022. But, you know, we certainly see all of these different justice movements and topics as intersectional. Poverty plays into gun violence. Race plays into it. So it's multifaceted and something that our committee wants to work with others to address.
I'm not quite sure that I understand what you were asking of me, but we, as far as working towards best practices, is that our agency is a CALEA accredited agency, which means that a national accreditation to ensure that we are following best practices. And what that means locally is that we are constantly evaluating our standards, our policies, our training mandates for our officers, so that we are meeting those best practices. We try not to silo ourselves by working with other organizations, because we can't solve the problem by ourselves. Just like Heather was making reference, we have poverty, we have racism, we have mental health issues, we have all these, it's a very complex situation that we deal with, and that how do we best work in our communities to resolve problems is our focus. And so that's what I push out, is that we're problem solvers, and that doesn't always mean that someone goes to jail. It means we try to find a resolution that works for the problem that you're dealing with.
I will just add, it made me think that we've talked a lot about school shootings here today and suicides. What we haven't talked about is the very sad upswing that we've seen in mass shootings at Jewish synagogues, at mosques, etc. So it seems to me that communities of faith are being called into this dilemma. If churches didn't feel called before, it seems to me that knowing that other people of faith are being targeted, maybe because of their faith, Black Church in South Carolina, for example. So we all need to come at this issue from whatever group of people feels most comfortable to us, whether that's a political group or a community of faith or school-based, wherever. I know we have former teachers in the audience, wherever you feel most comfortable, but we all have to bring solutions and a desire to do better, because America has, off the charts numbers in the amount of gun violence, and it just seems to keep getting worse. So you're right, we have to continue to elevate this conversation and bring people together of all backgrounds to try to address it, just like any other public health crisis. The pandemic and gun violence is
Intertwined.
yes.
I thought the documentary covered a lot of ground in that area. It doesn't matter who you are, it can impact your life. Gun violence can impact your life.
Okay, so as we are reaching the conclusion of our time together, we have a wonderful question from Julie Pepper from our YouTube channel. And Julie says, maybe as a closing thought, what gives our speakers the most hope that we will do more together to address gun violence?
I'll start with, I know I keep talking about gun safety, but I was so surprised with the rounds of phone calls that I made over the winter holidays at the broad agreement that we can and should be educating our population about gun safety. So that does give me hope. It's just, you just don't find consensus that often about anything.
I will tell you that I think it's having faith in our young people. I really do. I think that they're so unfairly criticized in so many ways, and I think all of us were those lazy teenagers before we became responsible adults. And so they have some incredible ideas, and I think we need to look at them as their information that they're providing us. I think it's just, there's nuggets of truth that we can mine from those ideas and make some solutions work for us. That's where my optimism comes from. When I see young people still wanting to become police officers in this environment, wow. And I think it's, I heard actually a preacher once say this, is that to be a police officer is a calling. And I truly believe that, and that some people, there's still individuals out there that have a calling and want to serve as public servants. And I'm so extremely grateful that they're still willing to come in.
That's a hard question, if I'm being honest, to answer. I mean, I wish I could tell you with a smile on my face, you wouldn't see it behind this mask anyway, that I had so much hope that things were going to change soon. I don't. I'm just going to be honest with you. I get really frustrated too, and I lose hope. Forums like this give me hope, because we're not here today because we just had a terrible tragedy in our own community and suddenly everybody cares. This shows me that you care now, even when we're in the safety of our small town. So that gives me hope. I hope you'll all contact your legislators and let them know that you care about this and you want to see some changes. Because when we stop talking about it, when we stop advocating for what we think is right, then we've really lost. We can't go backward. And I agree that I have hope in the children. I think, unfortunately, we've had a whole generation of kids that have grown up in schools where they had to do drills in school for an active shooter. I really worry about the trauma that has put those little kids through, having to envision that maybe someone with a gun's coming in my classroom to shoot me or my classmates or my teacher. But I hope that is implanted in them a deep-seated desire to fix America's problem with gun violence. So hopefully that harm that they've had to go through will cause them to care about this when they're old enough. And they'll run for office, and they'll vote, and they'll show up, and they'll advocate for change.
They will.
I have faith.
I tried to sneak in between the last comment and this last question, which was a wrap-up question, so I apologize for not getting it in before the wrap-up question. But to Gordon and to John's comments about what this group can do, my comment is, if you haven't, go back and watch the presentation that Chief Dunn made on her proposal for a co-response unit, and then be an active, engaged citizenry, so that when your board takes up that vote as to how to fund and move forward with a co-response unit in our community and in North Mecklenburg, be vocal supporters of it. Don't make us question as to whether this is something that the community wants to support. So I'll try to find the link of the presentation that Chief made November, October?
I believe it was October.
October. And so just a really great thing. So very critical in that how to engage and respond, that it may not be a person with a, law enforcement with a weapon showing up for a specific incident. So.
Okay, great. We have just a few more minutes, and I'd like to first give our panelists a little brief period of time just for a closing thought, closing comment before we conclude. Natasha, I'll start with you.
I don't think I have a whole lot more to add. There are more solutions we didn't cover. I mean, some specifics are, for example, when that background check I told you about that the sheriffs run, if someone's convicted of a misdemeanor level domestic violence offense, that doesn't disqualify them from purchasing a handgun. I think we could improve there. There are other things we could do. Unfortunately, I can't promise you any of it will happen anytime soon, given our current political climate, at least here in North Carolina. But I am encouraged that you're all here on a Sunday and care enough to want to be part of the solution. That's the only way we're going to get this done. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your good questions.
And of course, I'm coming from a school perspective. I think we're in a very disruptive time in history. Our culture is changing incredibly fast, and we don't know what it's changing into. And that creates lots and lots of challenges, and all of those challenges show up first in our schools and get experienced most immediately in our schools. And like the police department, our schools end up being called upon to do so much more than teaching. And so I will just wrap up with saying thank you to our educators, including Aquanetta Edmond, who supports our educators. Thank you to our teachers, our principals, our custodial staff. You never know who that trusted adult is going to be. So I just want to thank them and ask you all to show them some love and show the school system some love. That'll be my closing remark.
Well said. I've heard many of the victims of gun violence, survivors of gun violence speak, including some of the students that were in the classrooms at Virginia Tech. And you can't walk away from that not feeling something. And so I think the Trigger documentary is a good opportunity for you to share that with some folks that may never have that opportunity to actually meet someone who has experienced something like that. And so I think it's a good way to kind of spread that information about how it goes across all parts of our nation, all walks of life. And so that's my only thing, is that I had not seen the movie until last night, and now I'm like, okay, now I need to send a bunch of emails out saying, hey, watch this. It really is impactful. So that's just my closing.
And thank you. I just want to say thank you, too, for being here, and thank you for allowing us to be here and be a part of this conversation. When I think about the documentary, it talked about unifying, right? It talked about unity, and it talked about dialogue. I really commend Davidson, or that we've started it. This is a great start of what is possible. And the voices in the room, I always think about voice and impact, right? So when you're an educator, you say, hey, what can you do? What can you impact? And whom can you impact? So I think it's great to have the voice in the room about understanding the insight we've gained today. It's not always about a blame game of who did what, because it's a matter, to me, as it continues to permeate our communities and impact our children, it's hard to say where and when. The whole point about it, whether it's Arizona, whether it's Charlotte, whether it's Dallas, and you heard the different towns yesterday that were mentioned, or whenever you watched the documentary that are mentioned, it just continues to just go. And I, for one, want it to stop. And I, for one, want our children to be children and be able to enjoy school. And I, for one, when we are on the mend of a point of violence happening in our schools, there's no sleep. Just so you know, there's no sleep. We have officers that are out, we're out, principals are up, emails are going, communications are going, because our goal, and the insecurity is at our schools the next day. Police cars are present, and yet our little children, all of them, are expected to walk in and feel like it's a day of normalcy, when it's not. So I think about the trauma and just so many things that we, again, in this room today, can start engaging around a conversation of change, and what can we do to be part of that? Because that's where it starts. So thank you so much for being here, and let's go out and try to have an impact around it.
Great, thank you so much. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. So we're very grateful that you all could be with us today, and this was a wonderful discussion. And as I mentioned earlier, I hope it will be a springboard for continuing discussions. And I'm going to invite Reverend Alexander up. He's going to get the closing prayer and make some comments. But as he makes his way forward, I am the chair. My name is Heather McKee, and I'm the chair of the Social Justice Committee here at DCPC. If you haven't already, if you would pick up one of our brochures, we have them at the welcome desk there. And this brochure will give you a little bit more information about who we are, and also talks about our focus areas for 2022. And also on the back, you will find my email and Reverend Alexander's email. So if you would like to get involved with some of our future events, or have ideas on how we can work together with other community partners, we'd love to hear from you. And I personally would like to thank Reverend Alexander, Brad Beer, Marshall Webster, everyone who helped put this wonderful event together today. We are so happy you're here, and without further ado, here's Reverend Alexander.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks to our Social Justice Committee, and thank you so much for our panelists being here, and we hope to continue this conversation with you. Wanted to mention a couple things based on a couple of questions. First of all, I hope that you will take the initiative when you have the opportunity to get involved as a volunteer in one of our schools or in some other place where you can have a positive influence on some of our young people as they are growing. They need a adults that care and are setting good examples for them. There are great organizations like Sandy Hook Promise, which was mentioned earlier, that you can contribute to and be a part of. Our voting is obviously very important for long-term change. And then there's an organization in our denomination called Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. Some of you may be familiar with it. They have a great program, which we haven't looked very closely at, but we may be called Guns to Gardens. And it's kind of not quite a buyback program, but an opportunity for people to turn their guns into something that produces life instead of takes it away. So I encourage you to explore some of those things that are out there. Thanks again for coming today. I invite you to join me in a closing prayer. Lord of life, we thank you for your deep love for us. Continue to guide us by your Spirit to honor you and to honor the life that you've given us. Give us wisdom and courage to do what is right and best for all. Continue to bless these, our leaders, and the work that they do. Continue to help us in our efforts to make our communities and our homes and our lives safe and whole. We ask all this in your holy name. Amen. Thanks again for coming. Be safe.